Hello, English learners. I'm Erica, and you're listening to Listen and Learn English Pod, your go-to place to improve your English in a natural, engaging way. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room full of people where everyone is on their phone, scrolling, texting, checking notifications, but nobody is actually talking? It's ironic, right? Social media is supposed to connect us. Yet it often feels like we're more disconnected than ever. That's exactly what we're talking about today. Is social media making us less social? This is an important topic because social interactions are the foundation of human connection. But with the rise of social media, people seem to be spending more time interacting through screens rather than face-to-face. Is this affecting the way we communicate? Are we losing our ability to have real conversations? Before we get into it, let me remind you, listening, repeating, and shadowing are the keys to improving your English fluency. So make sure you're not just listening passively. Repeat the words, mimic my pronunciation, and shadow along with me to build confidence and fluency. All right, let's dive in. So, let's start with the basics. Social media has completely changed the way we interact. Think about it. Before social media, if you wanted to catch up with a friend, you'd pick up the phone and call them or meet up in person. Now, a simple like or comment on their post is considered keeping in touch. Now, don't get me wrong, social media has some amazing benefits. It allows us to stay connected with friends and family, even if they're miles away. It gives us access to different perspectives, ideas, and cultures. And let's be honest, it's pretty fun, right? Watching videos, sharing memes, posting updates, it's entertaining. But here's the catch. While social media is making us more connected online, it might be making us less connected in real life. For example, have you ever seen a group of friends sitting together, but instead of talking, they're all staring at their phones? It happens all the time. It's almost like people are more interested in their online life than the real-life company around them. And that brings me to the first word I want to break down: disengaged. When someone is disengaged, it means they're not fully involved or interested in what's happening around them. It's like their mind is somewhere else. Say it with me: disengaged. Again, disengaged. Let's put it in a sentence. She felt disengaged at the family dinner because everyone was on their phones. Another example is, he was so disengaged during the meeting that he didn't even realize they asked him a question. And one more, students often become disengaged when the lesson is boring. See? Disengaged is what happens when people focus more on their screens than the present moment. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Studies show that when people spend too much time on social media, they can start feeling lonely and isolated, even though they're constantly connected. How does that make sense? Shouldn't being connected make us feel less lonely? Well, that's because social media creates an illusion of connection. You might be scrolling through hundreds of posts, seeing what everyone is up to, but you're not actually interacting with them in a meaningful way. And that brings me to the next word: superficial. If something is superficial, it means it's only on the surface, not deep or meaningful. A superficial conversation is one that's shallow, without any real depth or emotional connection. Say it with me: superficial. Again, superficial. Let's put it in a sentence. Their friendship was superficial. They only talked about small things and never had deep conversations. Another example is, the conversation at the party felt superficial. Nobody was really interested in getting to know each other. And one more. Social media interactions can be superficial because people only share the good parts of their lives. See how that works? Many social media interactions are superficial. You might be liking someone's post or sending an emoji reaction, but you're not really connecting on a deeper level. So let's think about this. If social media is making people disengaged in real life and interactions more superficial, is it really bringing us closer or is it pushing us further apart? And here's the big question. Can we change this? Can we use social media without letting it take over real life connections? So, we talked about how social media can make interactions superficial and how people often seem disengaged in real life conversations. But there's another thing we need to consider: how social media affects the way we present ourselves. Think about this. When you scroll through Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, what do you see? Perfect vacations, flawless selfies, exciting events, beautiful meals. Everything looks amazing. But is that real life? Not really. Most people only post the highlights, the best moments, the most exciting parts of their lives. They carefully choose the best pictures, add filters, and even edit their posts to look more impressive. And that brings me to the next word I want to break down: curated. If something is curated, it means it has been carefully selected and arranged to look a certain way. On social media, people curate their lives, showing only the parts they want others to see. Say it with me: curated, again, curated. Let's put it in a sentence. Her Instagram page is carefully curated. Every picture is edited to match a perfect aesthetic. Another example is, companies curate their content to attract the right audience. And one more: his social media profile makes his life look perfect, but it's just a curated version of reality. So, when we look at these curated posts, what happens? We start comparing ourselves. We look at other people's lives and think, wow, they're doing so much better than me. But the truth is, we're comparing our reality to their highlight reel. And that brings me to the next word: distorted. If something is distorted, it means it's not accurate or true, but twisted in a way that makes it look different from reality. Say it with me: distorted, again, distorted. Let's put it in a sentence. Social media gives people a distorted view of reality because they only see the best parts of others' lives. Another example is, his memory of the event was distorted. He exaggerated the good parts and ignored the bad. And one more: news can sometimes be distorted to make a story seem more dramatic than it really is. So, here's the problem. When people see these curated, distorted versions of life online, they start feeling inadequate. They think, why isn't my life that exciting? Why don't I look that good? Why am I not traveling to amazing places? And that can lead to feelings of low self-esteem, anxiety, and even depression. But let's stop for a second. Why do we fall into this trap? We know that social media isn't showing the full picture, yet we still let it affect how we feel about ourselves. Isn't that strange? The truth is, social media is designed to make us feel this way. The more time we spend scrolling, comparing, and feeling bad, the more we keep coming back for validation, checking for likes, comments, and approval. It becomes a cycle, and breaking free from it isn't always easy. So, what can we do about it? Should we just quit social media altogether? Or is there a way to use it without letting it affect our mental health? So, we've talked about how social media creates a distorted version of reality and makes people feel like they're falling behind in life. But now, let's focus on another major issue: how social media changes the way we interact and communicate with each other. Think about it. Before social media, if you wanted to catch up with a friend, what would you do? You'd probably call them, meet up for coffee, or have a long chat in person. Conversations had depth, meaning, and real emotions. But now, a quick, "Hey, how are you?" over text, a few emojis, or a double tap on a post is considered staying in touch. And this brings me to the next word I want to break down: superficial. If something is superficial, It means it lacks depth or real meaning. It's shallow and only on the surface without true emotional connection. Say it with me, superficial. Again, superficial. Let's put it in a sentence. Our conversations have become so superficial. We just send memes instead of really talking. Another example is, his apology felt superficial, like he didn't really mean it. And one more, social media friendships are often superficial because they're based on likes and comments, not real connections. See what's happening? We think we're connected, but in reality, many of these interactions are superficial. Now, let's take it a step further. Since so much of our communication happens online, people are losing the ability to read emotions, understand tone, or handle real-life conversations. How many times have you seen misunderstandings happen just because someone misread a text message? This brings me to the next word, misinterpret. If you misinterpret something, it means you understand it the wrong way, often because of a lack of context or tone. Say it with me. Misinterpret. Again, misinterpret. Let's put it in a sentence. I didn't mean to upset her. She misinterpreted my message. Another example is, people often misinterpret sarcasm in text messages because there's no tone of voice. And one more, he misinterpreted her silence as anger, but she was just lost in thought. See how this works? When communication lacks voice, facial expressions, and emotions, it becomes easy to misinterpret what people actually mean. But here's the bigger problem. When people get used to quick, easy, and surface-level communication online, they start avoiding real, deep, face-to-face conversations. How often do you see people at restaurants, sitting together but staring at their phones instead of talking? How many times do people text instead of calling because they feel awkward in real conversations? Social media is making us more connected, but also more distant. So, what does this mean for the future of human interaction? Are we losing the ability to communicate deeply? Can we still build meaningful relationships in the age of social media? That's what we'll explore next. Let's keep going. So, we've talked about how social media makes our interactions superficial and how online conversations can be misinterpreted without tone and facial expressions. But now, let's dig deeper. Is social media replacing real human connection? Think about this. You're at a family gathering, sitting at the table with your loved ones. But instead of talking, what's everyone doing? Scrolling, texting, checking notifications. The room is full of people, yet it feels strangely silent. This is happening everywhere. Friends meet up, but instead of chatting, they're stuck to their screens. Parents are with their kids, but instead of bonding, they're busy replying to emails or watching TikTok videos. And let's be honest, we've all done this at some point. And that brings me to the next word, disconnect. To disconnect means to lose emotional or social connection with someone or something. It's when people are physically together, but mentally distant. Say it with me, disconnect. Again, disconnect. Let's put it in a sentence. Even though we live in the same house, I feel disconnected from my brother because he's always on his phone. Another example is, I tried to talk to her, but she seemed disconnected, lost in her thoughts. And one more, social media was supposed to bring people closer, but in many ways, it's making us more disconnected. See? We might be more connected than ever, but at the same time, we're feeling more disconnected from real-life relationships. And here's something even more interesting. Have you ever noticed that some people prefer texting over talking? They find real conversations awkward, exhausting, or even stressful. Why? Because social media gives you time to think, edit, and carefully craft your responses. But in real life, conversations are raw, unfiltered, and spontaneous. There's no delete button, no filters, no perfect captions, just you and the other person talking. And that brings me to another word: avoidance. If someone engages in avoidance, it means they deliberately stay away from something, often because they find it uncomfortable or stressful. Say it with me: avoidance. Again, avoidance. Let's put it in a sentence. His avoidance of real conversations is making it hard to build a deeper connection. Another example is, she uses social media as a form of avoidance because she feels anxious in social situations. And one more. Many people develop avoidance behaviors, choosing to text instead of making a phone call. See what's happening? The more we rely on social media for communication, the more we avoid real human interaction. But here's the question: what are the long-term effects of this? If we keep replacing face-to-face conversations with texts, likes, and emojis, what will happen to our ability to communicate in the real world? So, we've talked about how social media can make us feel disconnected and how people use avoidance to escape real-life interactions. But now, let's go even further. Is social media making us forget how to communicate in the real world? Think about this. How often do people nowadays struggle with small talk? How many people feel nervous making eye contact or even answering a simple phone call? It's becoming more common. Why? Because social media has retrained our brains. Online, you can take your time to think, edit, delete, and reword your messages. But real-life conversations don't work like that. They're unpredictable, immediate, and sometimes messy. And this brings me to the next word: spontaneous. When something is spontaneous, it means it happens naturally, without planning or rehearsal. It's the kind of conversation where you say what's on your mind in the moment. Say it with me: spontaneous. Again, spontaneous. Let's put it in a sentence. She prefers spontaneous conversations rather than scripted ones. Another example is, our trip was completely spontaneous. We just packed our bags and left. And one more, he struggles with spontaneous interactions because he's used to texting and thinking before responding. See the problem? Social media makes us comfortable with rehearsed conversations, but in real life, we need to be spontaneous. And here's another thing. Have you noticed how people overthink their messages? They type, delete, type again, and edit a simple text like, "Hey, how are you?" They analyze every emoji, every punctuation mark, and every word. Why? Because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. Social media makes people hyper-aware of how they come across. And that leads to the next word: self-conscious. To be self-conscious means to be overly aware of how others perceive you, often in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious. Say it with me: self-conscious. Again, self-conscious. Let's put it in a sentence. He feels self-conscious about speaking in public because he's afraid of making mistakes. Another example is, she's so self-conscious about how she looks in photos that she spends hours editing them. And one more, social media can make people more self-conscious because they constantly compare themselves to others. See how it connects? People are becoming so self-conscious online that it's affecting their confidence in real-life conversations. And here's the real question. If we keep communicating this way, will we eventually lose the ability to have natural face-to-face conversations? Will we struggle with job interviews, networking, dating, and even casual chats with friends? That's what we'll dive into next. Let's keep going. So, we've talked about how social media makes people self-conscious and less spontaneous in real-life conversations. But let's take this even further. Is social media changing the way we express emotions? Think about it. When you talk to someone face to face, you're not just using words, you're using tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language. But online, it's just text. Flat, emotionless text. Sure, we have emojis, but can a little yellow face really replace real human emotions? And that led me to something interesting. Misinterpretation. Misinterpretation happens when someone understands something incorrectly or takes it the wrong way. And social media is full of it. Say it with me, misinterpretation. Again, misinterpretation. Let's put it in a sentence. Text messages are easy to misinterpret because they don't show tone or emotion. Another example is she misinterpreted his joke and thought he was being rude. And one more. Misinterpretation of online comments often leads to unnecessary arguments. See the problem? People are constantly misinterpreting messages because they lack the emotional cues of real conversation. And here's another thing. Have you ever noticed how people use extreme words online? Instead of saying, "That's interesting," they say, "That's mind-blowing." Instead of, "That was annoying," they say, "That was the worst thing ever." Why? Because social media rewards exaggeration. And that brings us to the next word, sensationalizing. To sensationalize means to exaggerate something to make it seem more exciting, shocking, or dramatic than it really is. Say it with me, sensationalizing. Again, sensationalizing. Let's put it in a sentence. The media often sensationalizes stories to grab people's attention. Another example is, stop sensationalizing everything. It wasn't that dramatic. And one more. Social media posts are full of sensationalized headlines to make people click. See how this connects? People are so used to exaggerated online language that normal, everyday conversations feel dull. They expect everything to be shocking, dramatic, or extreme. And here's the scary part. When real emotions get replaced by emojis and real conversations get replaced by exaggerated text, do we start losing our ability to communicate deeply? So, we've talked about how social media warps the way we express emotions. But there's something even bigger happening. Is it changing our attention span? Think about it. A decade ago, people could sit through long conversations, read entire books, and watch full-length movies without feeling restless. But now, if a video is longer than 30 seconds, people scroll past it. If a message is more than a few words, they skim. So, we've talked about how social media warps the way we express emotions, but there's something even bigger happening. Is it changing our attention span? Think about it. A decade ago, people could sit through long conversations, read entire books, and watch full-length movies without feeling restless. But now, if a video is longer than 30 seconds, people scroll past it. If a message is more than a few words, they skim. If a conversation isn't instantly engaging, they tune out. And this leads us to something important: instant gratification. Instant gratification is the desire to get something immediately without waiting or putting in effort. Say it with me. Instant gratification. Again, instant gratification. Let's put it in a sentence. Social media is designed for instant gratification, giving us quick entertainment with no effort. Another example is, people now expect instant gratification, which makes it harder to focus on long-term goals. And one more, constantly seeking instant gratification can make patience and deep thinking difficult. See the issue. Social media is training our brains to crave fast, easy stimulation. We expect quick replies, short videos, and immediate entertainment. And what happens when real life doesn't move that fast? Boredom, frustration, lack of focus. And here's something even more worrying. People don't just expect instant gratification from content, they expect it from relationships too. Think about it. How many people form deep connections anymore? Everything is surface level, quick chats, reaction emojis, and scrolling past people's lives instead of really engaging. This is exactly what's happening with social media. Conversations are getting shorter, connections are becoming shallower, patience is disappearing. But here's the big question. If we're losing our ability to focus, connect deeply, and engage in meaningful conversations, what does that mean for our future relationships? That's what we'll explore next. So, we've talked about how social media is shrinking our attention spans and making everything feel fast and shallow. But now, let's take it a step further. Is social media making us lonelier? You'd think that with millions of people online, constantly connected, we'd feel closer than ever, right? But in reality, many people feel more isolated than before. And that brings us to something important. A false sense of connection. A false sense of connection is when you feel like you're socially engaged. But in reality, the connection isn't deep or meaningful. Say it with me. False sense of connection. Again, false sense of connection. Let's put it in a sentence. Liking someone's post gives a false sense of connection. It's not the same as a real conversation. Another example is, social media can create a false sense of connection, making people feel like they have friendships when they don't. And one more. Texting all day might give you a false sense of connection, but nothing replaces face-to-face interaction. See what's happening? People feel like they're socially engaged because they're interacting online. But in reality, a few likes and comments can't replace real, deep human connection. And here's where it gets worse. Because social media makes us feel connected, we don't put effort into real relationships. Instead of meeting up, we text. Instead of calling, we send emojis. Instead of having deep talks, we reply with gifs. So what happens? People slowly lose the ability to connect in real life. They get used to quick, effortless interactions and find real conversations exhausting. Think about it. When was the last time you had a long, meaningful conversation without distractions? No phone, no scrolling, just deep, focused conversation. It's rare, isn't it? And that's exactly the problem. But here's the big question. If social media keeps replacing real interaction, are we heading toward a world where loneliness becomes the norm? So, we just talked about a false sense of connection and how social media tricks people into feeling socially engaged, when in reality, they're not. But now, let's take it a step further. What happens when social media replaces real relationships entirely? Here's something interesting. Many people today feel lonelier than ever, despite being more connected than any other generation in history. And the irony? Social media, which was supposed to bring us closer, is actually pushing us apart. Think about this. In the past, if you wanted to stay in touch with someone, you had to make an effort, write letters, make phone calls, plan meetups. But now, all it takes is a quick message or a like, and suddenly, it feels like you've checked in with them. But is that really staying connected? And this brings us to another important phrase, surface-level interactions. Now, let's pause here for a second. What does surface-level interactions mean? It refers to shallow, meaningless conversations that lack depth or real emotional connection. These are the quick texts, the haha replies, the emoji responses, things that don't really build a real relationship. Say it with me, surface-level interactions. Again, surface-level interactions. Let's put it in a sentence. Most conversations on social media are just surface-level interactions. They don't really bring people closer. Another example is, she was tired of surface-level interactions and wanted deep, meaningful friendships. And one more. Texting all day might seem like communication, But if it's just surface level interactions, it won't strengthen a friendship. See the problem? People are mistaking constant communication for deep connection. Just because you interact with someone online every day doesn't mean you actually have a strong bond with them. And over time, this makes real-life relationships weaker. And here's where it gets worse. Because social media makes interactions so easy, people become lazy in their real-life relationships. They stop putting in effort. They stop showing up for important moments. They rely on texts instead of calls, and calls instead of face-to-face meetings. Have you ever seen a group of friends sitting together at a cafe, but instead of talking, they're all on their phones? That's exactly what's happening. Social media has made people so used to digital communication that even when they're physically together, they struggle to be present in the moment. And this leads us to something even bigger. Social skills are disappearing. People are losing the ability to read body language, pick up on social cues, or have deep conversations without distractions. They get uncomfortable with silence. They struggle with face-to-face conflict. They don't know how to handle real emotions without a screen in front of them. And this is dangerous, because at the end of the day, human connection is what keeps us mentally and emotionally healthy. We're wired for real conversations. We need eye contact, facial expressions, physical presence, all the things that social media can't provide. And when we replace real interactions with digital ones, we slowly start to feel more disconnected, empty, and isolated. So, what's the solution? Can social media be used without losing real connections? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. Now, let's talk about something really important. Can social media be used without losing real human connections? See, social media itself isn't the enemy. It's a tool, and like any tool, it depends on how you use it. A knife, for example, can be used to prepare food or cause harm. It all comes down to who is holding it and how they choose to use it. The same goes for social media. It can be used to strengthen relationships or weaken them. It can make people more informed or more misinformed. It can connect or divide. It all depends on how people interact with it. And this brings us to an important phrase: digital detox. Now, let's pause here for a second. What exactly is a digital detox? A digital detox is a period of time when someone deliberately avoids digital devices, especially social media, to reduce stress and improve mental well-being. It's a way to reset, break unhealthy habits, and refocus on real-life interactions. Say it with me: digital detox. Again, digital detox. Let's put it in a sentence. After realizing how much time she was spending on her phone, she decided to do a digital detox for a week. Another example is, many people find that taking a digital detox helps them feel more present and less anxious. And one more, he felt overwhelmed by constant notifications, so he went on a digital detox to clear his mind. See, the biggest issue with social media isn't just the time spent on it. It's the way it takes over people's minds. Even when they're not using it, they're thinking about it. They're checking their phones constantly, scrolling mindlessly, and feeling anxious when they can't access it. And this is why a digital detox can be so powerful. It gives people a chance to reconnect with themselves, focus on real relationships, and break free from the cycle of constant online stimulation. Now, let's be honest. Not everyone is ready for a full detox. Some people rely on social media for work, networking, or even staying in touch with loved ones. So if quitting completely isn't an option, what's the alternative? That's where mindful social media use comes in. Instead of mindless scrolling, people need to develop intentional habits. For example, setting time limits. Instead of spending hours online, limit usage to a set amount of time per day. Unfollowing negative accounts if certain accounts make you feel insecure, anxious, or angry. Unfollow them. Prioritizing real conversations. Make an effort to have face-to-face talks instead of just texting. Because here's the truth. Social media should serve you, not control you. If it's making you feel lonely, anxious, or disconnected, then something needs to change. And if you can use it with purpose, balance, and awareness, then it can actually be a tool for enhancing your life, not replacing it. So, the question is, how do we strike that balance? Is there a way to use social media without letting it take over our lives? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. But if you actively choose to follow people who inspire, educate, or entertain you in a positive way, it can actually be a valuable tool for learning, growth, and motivation. That's why the first step to healthy social media use is curation. But there's another key factor: engagement. See, many people passively scroll through social media, consuming post after post without really interacting. This is what makes social media feel isolating and unfulfilling. It turns people into spectators instead of participants. And this is why meaningful engagement is so important. Instead of just liking posts mindlessly or scrolling for hours, social media should be about having real conversations, sharing valuable ideas, and connecting with people in an authentic way. But here's the tricky part. Not all engagement is positive. Some people use social media to argue, spread negativity, or get attention through controversy. And this is where things get dangerous, because negative interactions can be just as addictive as positive ones. In fact, studies have shown that anger and outrage spread faster than kindness and positivity online. This is why controversial or extreme content often goes viral. It gets people talking, even if it's in a toxic way. And that brings us to another word: polarization. Let's pause here. What exactly is polarization? Polarization refers to a situation where people are divided into extreme opposing groups, with little room for middle ground or compromise. It often happens in politics, social issues, and even online debates, where people become so attached to their views that they refuse to consider other perspectives. Say it with me. Polarization. Again, polarization. Let's put it in a sentence. Social media has contributed to political polarization by creating echo chambers where people only hear opinions they already agree with. Another example is, the more extreme the content, the more engagement it gets, which fuels even more polarization. And one more, healthy discussions are important, but extreme polarization makes it hard for people to find common ground. Now, why does polarization matter when we talk about social media? Because the more divided people become, the less they actually listen to each other. Instead of having open, thoughtful conversations, social media becomes a battleground where everyone is trying to prove they're right instead of trying to understand. And when this happens, it makes social media feel stressful, frustrating, and exhausting, which is the opposite of what it should be. So, if we want to use social media in a way that helps us rather than harms us, we need to, firstly, curate our feeds. Follow accounts that add value to our lives instead of making us feel worse. Secondly, engage meaningfully, focus on real conversations, not just passive scrolling or toxic debates. And lastly, avoid polarization. Keep an open mind instead of falling into extreme, divisive discussions. Because at the end of the day, social media is what we make it. If we use it wisely, intentionally, and with balance, it can be a tool for connection and growth rather than a source of stress and division. But that's easier said than done, right? Because no matter how much we try to use social media positively, there's always one thing pulling us back. It's addictive nature. Now, here's something to think about. If social media makes us feel anxious, distracted, or even lonely at times, why do we keep coming back to it? The answer is simple. It's designed to keep us hooked. Think about it. The endless scroll, the notifications, the likes, the comments, it's all built in a way that keeps us constantly engaged, craving that next hit of dopamine. And this brings us to an interesting word, compulsion. Let's pause here. What does compulsion mean? Compulsion refers to an irresistible urge to do something, often repeatedly, even when we know it's not necessarily good for us. It's that feeling of needing to check your phone, even when there's no real reason to. Say it with me. Compulsion. Again, compulsion. Let's put it in a sentence. She felt a strong compulsion to check her social media every few minutes, even when she had nothing to look at. Another example is, social media apps are designed to create a sense of compulsion, making it hard for users to put their phones down. And one more, many people struggle with the compulsion to scroll through their feeds late at night, even when they know they should be sleeping. See, social media isn't just something we use. For many, it becomes something we depend on. Whether it's checking for notifications, refreshing the feed, or responding to comments, there's always something pulling us back. And the more time we spend on it, the harder it becomes to step away. Here's where things get even more complicated. This need to constantly check, refresh, and engage isn't just a habit. It's often a response to a deeper emotional need. Social media gives us instant feedback, instant entertainment, and instant connection. And in a world where people are constantly searching for validation, distraction, or even escape, it becomes the easiest way to fill the gaps. But here's the problem. The more we rely on social media for emotional fulfillment, the less we seek it in real life. Now, let's talk about a word that perfectly describes this phenomenon. Substitution. Let's pause here. What exactly is substitution? Substitution means replacing one thing with another, often as a way to fill a gap or compensate for something missing. Say it with me. Substitution. Again, substitution. Let's put it in a sentence. For many people, social media has become a substitution for real-life conversation and relationships. Another example is, instead of dealing with emotions in a healthy way, some use social media as a substitution for genuine human connection. And one more, the constant urge to post and get likes is often a substitution for deeper self-worth and validation. See, the danger of social media isn't just that it takes up time, it's that it can slowly replace real-life experiences without us even realizing it. Think about it. How many times have you seen people at a restaurant sitting together but glued to their phones instead of talking? How often do people share moments online instead of fully living them? How many friendships and relationships suffer because face-to-face conversations are replaced with text messages and social media interactions? This is where the real issue lies. Not just in the time we spend online, but in what we're giving up in exchange. And it's not just about relationships. Even our thoughts, emotions, and decision-making processes are being shaped by what we consume online. Instead of forming our own opinions, we often absorb whatever is trending. Instead of reflecting on our emotions, we distract ourselves with endless scrolling. Instead of being present, we're constantly thinking about the next post, the next notification, the next update. So, what's the solution? It's not about quitting social media completely, because let's be honest, that's not realistic for most people. It's about using it consciously instead of letting it control us. If we find ourselves checking our phones compulsively, using social media as a substitution for real life connections, or constantly comparing ourselves to others online, then it's time to step back and reassess how we use it. Because at the end of the day, social media is a tool, and like any tool, it can either help us or harm us depending on how we use it. But of course, knowing this and actually changing our habits are two very different things. So, how do we take back control? One of the biggest ironies of social media is this. We call it a social platform, yet more and more people feel disconnected than ever before. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, after spending hours scrolling through posts, you don't feel happy or satisfied, but instead feel a little empty? It's as if, rather than bringing people closer, social media is actually pushing them further apart. Now, let's pause for a moment and really think about this. In the past, if you wanted to know how a friend was doing, you would call them, meet them, or write to them. There was a direct personal connection. But today, you see their latest post, like it, maybe drop a comment, and move on. It creates an illusion of connection. It feels like you're keeping in touch, but in reality, are you really talking? That's the question. And the more we replace real conversations with quick social media interactions, the more our relationships begin to feel surface level. Now, this leads us to an important term, dilution. Let's pause here. What does dilution mean? Dilution means making something weaker or less effective by adding unnecessary elements. Say it with me, dilution. Again, dilution. Let's put it in a sentence. Social media has led to the dilution of deep, meaningful relationships, replacing them with short, superficial interactions. Another example is, when we rely on likes and comments instead of real conversations, it causes a dilution of genuine human connection. And one more, over time, constant exposure to heavily edited images and staged posts leads to a dilution of what's real and what's fake. See how powerful that is? When something is diluted, it loses its strength. Another example is, when we rely on likes and comments instead of real conversations, it causes a dilution of genuine human connection. And one more. Over time, constant exposure to heavily edited images and staged posts leads to a dilution of what's real and what's fake. See how powerful that is? When something is diluted, it loses its strength. And that's exactly what's happening to many friendships, families, and even romantic relationships. Think about it. How many times have you seen people celebrating something special, but instead of being in the moment, they're too busy capturing it for social media? Or couples sitting at dinner, both staring at their phones instead of talking to each other? We're more connected than ever, yet many people feel more alone than ever. Here's the thing. Social media doesn't create real bonds. It only maintains them. If a friendship or relationship isn't strong in real life, no amount of likes, comments, or DMs can fix that. But instead of seeing this, many people fall into the trap of thinking they're staying connected, when in reality, they're just keeping up with updates. And this leads to another serious issue: passive relationships. What do I mean by that? A passive relationship is when you know about someone's life, but aren't really part of it. You see their vacation pictures, you read about their achievements, you watch their stories, but you haven't actually spoken to them in months. This is something that never really existed before social media. In the past, if you lost touch with someone, you just didn't know what was going on in their life. But today, you see everything, even without ever having a conversation. And this creates a strange situation. You feel like you're still in their life, even when you're not. And the worst part? It makes it easy to avoid real effort in relationships. Because let's be honest, real friendships require time, effort, and emotional investment. But scrolling through someone's posts is effortless. Liking a picture takes half a second. Sending a quick reaction on a story takes no thought at all. And slowly, without realizing it, we start substituting real effort with minimal gestures. But here's the problem. These small interactions don't build deep relationships. A friendship isn't built on likes. A relationship isn't strengthened by quick emojis. A family bond isn't maintained through random heart reactions. It takes real, intentional effort. And this is where we have to ask ourselves, are we using social media to stay connected, or are we using it as a shortcut to avoid real interaction? Because if we're not careful, we might wake up one day and realize that we have hundreds of online connections, but no one to truly talk to. And that is the real danger. So, what do? How do we make sure we're using social media to enhance our relationships rather than weaken them? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. Now, let's think about the way we communicate on social media. A lot of people say that social media has made communication easier, but has it really? Or has it just made it faster and shallower? Let's take a simple example, texting. Before, if you wanted to talk to someone, you had to call them or meet them in person. There was effort involved. Now, you just send a message, and sometimes you don't even write full words, just abbreviations, emojis, or a quick LOL to keep the conversation going. But here's the question. Are these conversations meaningful, or are they just filling space? This brings us to something really interesting. The illusion of engagement. What does that mean? It means people feel like they're interacting, but in reality, they're just exchanging fragments of communication, a comment here, a reaction there, a short message once in a while. But real engagement, real conversations that have depth, emotion, and connection, those are happening less and less. Think about it. How often do people really express how they feel in a message? And when was the last time you had a deep, meaningful conversation? Not over text, not in DMs, but face to face? That's something to really reflect on. And this leads us to another powerful term, detachment. Let's pause and break it down. Detachment means a lack of emotional connection or involvement in something. Say it with me, detachment. Again, detachment. Let's put it in a sentence. People are becoming so used to online interactions that they experience detachment from real-life conversations. Another example is constant exposure to highlight reels on social media can lead to detachment from reality. And one more, when communication becomes digital only, there's a risk of emotional detachment between friends and family. See how that works? Detachment means you're present, but you're not really engaged. And this is exactly what social media is doing to many of us. It's like we're there, we're connected, we're involved, but at the same time, we're not really feeling anything deeply. Now, this is especially true when it comes to emotions. Have you ever noticed how, when something important happens, instead of feeling it, people's first reaction is to post about it? Whether it's a happy moment or a sad one, the instinct is, let me take a picture, let me post a story, let me update my status. And over time, this starts to change how we process emotions. Instead of experiencing a moment fully, we start experiencing it through the lens of social media. And this can have a serious effect on emotional depth. Because when you start seeking validation from likes, shares, and comments, you're no longer focusing on the actual emotion. You're focusing on the reaction it will get online. This is why, even when people receive good news, they don't just feel happy, they feel happy only when others react to their post. And the same thing happens with bad news. Grief, sadness, frustration. These emotions are now shared online, and in some cases, they become performative. People start asking themselves, how should I express this in a way that gets attention? And that is where emotional detachment starts to happen. Instead of dealing with emotions in a real way, through reflection, conversation, and real-life support, many people turn to social media as their primary outlet. But here's the issue. Social media is not a replacement for real emotional support. 100 comments saying, "I'm here for you," are not the same as one real friend sitting with you and listening. And yet, more and more people are choosing online validation over real-world support. Because let's be honest, social media makes it easy to appear connected, even when you're not. You can post about your struggles without actually opening up to anyone. You can share about your achievements without actually celebrating them with the people closest to you. And you can react to someone's life updates without ever having a real conversation with them. And over time, this leads to something even more dangerous: social exhaustion. What do I mean by that? It means people start feeling drained from social interactions, even though those interactions aren't deep or meaningful. Have you ever spent hours scrolling, replying to messages, leaving comments, only to feel mentally exhausted afterward? That's social exhaustion. It's when your mind is overstimulated by too much digital interaction without getting any real human connection. And this is one of the biggest reasons why people feel lonely, even when they're surrounded by hundreds of online connections. Because real connection isn't just about interaction, it's about depth. So, how do we fix this? How do we make sure social media enhances our relationships instead of replacing them? So, let's really think about this. If social media is making us less socially engaged in real life, then why do we still use it so much? Well, one reason is that it gives us a sense of connection, even if that connection is sometimes superficial. Think about it. Social media is designed to keep us engaged. The more time we spend scrolling, reacting, and commenting, the more we feel like we're part of something. But are we really? Or are we just caught up in an illusion of interaction? Because here's something to consider. Is a like the same as a conversation? Is commenting "happy birthday" on someone's post the same as actually calling them to wish them? And when we say we're keeping in touch with someone online, what does that really mean? Does it mean we know what's happening in their lives? Or does it mean we've seen what they chose to share? This is where we need to pause and really reflect, because sometimes what social media offers is not real connection, it's a replacement for it. And this is where we start to see something really interesting: the paradox of social media. Now let's pause here and break this down. A paradox is when two things seem like they should not exist together, but they do. Say it with me. Paradox, again, paradox. Let's put it in a sentence. Social media creates a paradox. It connects people digitally, but often makes them feel isolated in real life. Another example is, it's a strange paradox that the more we share our lives online, the more disconnected we feel. And one more. Modern communication is full of paradoxes. We have more ways to talk to each other, yet fewer deep conversations. So, the paradox of social media is this: it promises connection, but in many ways, it creates isolation. And this is why so many people feel lonely, even when they have hundreds or thousands of online friends. Because following someone's life is not the same as being part of it. Reading someone's posts is not the same as truly knowing them. And getting likes and comments is not the same as real emotional support. Now let's talk about another major issue: social comparison. Have you ever caught yourself looking at someone's pictures online and thinking, wow, their life looks amazing? Or maybe you've seen someone's success post and thought, I wish I had that. This happens all the time, and it's because of one thing. Social media is a highlights reel. People don't post their full reality. They post the best parts, the happiest moments, the most exciting experiences, the biggest achievements. That's what we see. But what we don't see is the struggle behind those moments. We don't see the failures, the disappointments, the moments of doubt, and yet we compare our real lives to someone else's filtered version. And this is where a really interesting effect starts to happen. People feel worse about their own lives, even when nothing is wrong. Because when all you see are perfect vacations, perfect relationships, and perfect achievements, you start wondering, am I missing something? And that thought alone can create dissatisfaction. But here's the thing, no one's life is perfect. Everyone has struggles, everyone has challenges. But social media doesn't always show that. And this is where self-awareness becomes really important. Because if we don't remind ourselves that social media is just a curated version of reality, we can fall into the trap of feeling like our own lives aren't enough. And this is where people start feeling pressure. Not just to succeed, but to show their success online. It's no longer enough to have a good moment. You have to prove it. It's not enough to be happy. You have to make sure other people see it. And this is where something really dangerous starts to happen. People start performing their lives instead of living them. Instead of enjoying a moment fully, they spend it capturing, editing, and posting it. Instead of having experiences for themselves, they start shaping them based on what looks good online. And in the process, they lose something really valuable: authenticity. Because when you start living for an audience, you stop being fully present in your own life. And the worst part, many people don't even realize it's happening. It's so normal now to post about everything: trips, meals, workouts, achievements, even emotions. All right, let's wrap this up. So, what's the final takeaway? Social media is neither entirely good nor entirely bad. It's a tool. And like any tool, how we use it determines its impact on our lives. If we use it mindfully, it can help us stay connected, informed, and even inspired. But if we let it take over, it can replace real relationships, distort our self-image, and make us feel more alone than ever. The key is balance. Instead of letting social media dictate how we interact, we should ask ourselves, are we using it to enhance our lives, or is it becoming a distraction from real life? Are we engaging in meaningful conversations, or are we just scrolling mindlessly? Are we posting because we want to share something real, or because we feel pressure to prove something? These are the questions we need to ask ourselves. Because at the end of the day, real connection happens outside of screens. It's in the deep conversations, the laughter, the shared experiences that don't need to be posted to be meaningful. So maybe the challenge isn't to quit social media. It's to use it wisely, to recognize its limits, to step away when needed, to prioritize face-to-face interactions over virtual ones. Because no matter how advanced technology gets, nothing will ever replace the power of a real in-person conversation. And that's something worth holding on to. Thanks for listening to Learn Fluent English Pod. I'll see you in the next episode.